Well, good morning, Mr. Budd.
Morning.
It's April 9th, and it's around 9:30 in the morning, April 9th, 2008, and we are sitting at Porter Novelli in New York City. And Mr. Budd has agreed to spend a little time with us and talk about his history and his thoughts on public relations. So let's start at the beginning and take a look at how you selected a career in public relations. You started at Carl Bayer, but I think there were some things that happened before that.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about any previous experience that may have influenced your career path? And then while at Bayer, did you face any challenges during the transitions that you made from staff writer to vice chair? Because I know you were at Bayer, you left, and you went to Emhart, and then you came back to Bayer. So tell us a little bit about that whole time of your life.
Well, when you look back, you put things in a different focus than when you're doing them. Yeah. And you can see what you were doing that you didn't see when you were doing it. So I guess I was inevitably headed where I went in college. I went to Hofstra, Edison College, now a university. I majored in political science and sociology, minored in history, and then came in contact with an academic power broker of the type I'm sure you're familiar with. His name was Joseph Roucek, R-O-U-C-E-K, head of the Department of Sociology. And I'm essentially an introvert. You may not believe that, but I am. So the first 2 years at Hopton, which was a small school at that time, was very uneventful, but I like sociology, and Roucek had a habit of singling out somebody in a class who was gay and making he or her, him or her, his protege, really his lackey. And he picked me, gave me no benefits, really, because I had to still participate in the class. But he pushed me into things I wouldn't normally have done on my own initiative. He wanted me to be editor of the newspaper so he could get publicity. He wanted me to be president of the International Club because he thought it would be good for him, and so on and so on and so forth. And I found I didn't object to all of that. I kind of like doing different things. So I guess I was finding out that I had a little entrepreneurialism in myself that I didn't recognize. So then I went out. My first job was with something called Northeast Airlines, a little feeder line from New England to the Cape and so on. It didn't amount to much. We were just really goodwill ambassadors going around calling on people to remind them of Northeast. And they didn't give two hoots about Northeast except they wanted to get to Cape Cod in the summer, and they couldn't get flights, so they were nice to me. I got bored with that, and I answered an ad in a paper for a publicity job that was then called the Museum of Science and Industry, which was in 30 Rockefeller Plaza, right in the heart of that building. And it had been, the Museum of Science and Industry had been popular at one time, but it had been stagnated. They had scientific displays, and it was really pretty awful. So the moribund trustees hired an unemployed 20th Century Fox producer to come in and do things. And he created events like an exhibition of Joe Davison, J.O., sculpture. But his big moneymaker was photographic exhibitions. And I was hired to publicize them and also to create things within to make things happen. And I got the idea one time to bring in a car so that models could pose in it for the photographers, the amateurs. And another friend of mine was doing freelance publicity for something called the Barbizon School of Models. So we worked out a deal that he would make these girls available if we gave them the photographs, because they all needed portfolios. Well, the only car I could get into the museum was a car called the Willys. It was like a small Chrysler these days. And I found out that the agency handling Willys was Carl Bayer. So I just called, and this young guy showed up who was a sort of a staffer on the account, and his name was Joe Connolly. And he was like I was. He was a bachelor, same age, and we immediately liked each other. And he was an organizer, an operator, as we would say. He said, I have to get into Carl Bayer, because we wanted to work together. I said, what is Carl Bayer? It's in public relations. What the hell is that? Don't worry. So we could spend the morning talking about how I finessed my way in. But that's how I got in. I had no idea what public relations was. All I knew that it was more freewheeling than any job. See, I turned down my father, who wanted me to go into the family publishing business. But the specialty was income, tariffs, custom duties, and things like that. He started with a 25-cent magazine, sort of like a Zagat survey, half the size, and built it up into a 400 or 500 page huge book, which the State Department bought about 1,000 each year. And then he had a monthly magazine called Import and Export Bulletin, and then he had another one called Air Transportation. But it was all too boring to me, so I had to do it on my own in a different way. I suppose I disappointed him. So I get into Carl Bayer, and it was assigned to the Hallmark account, which wasn't called Hallmark at that time. It was called Hall Brothers, because the founders of Hallmark were three Halls, H-A-L-L-S. And I was the youngest and certainly the cheapest person ever hired by Bayer at that time. I think I got $50 a week. And Bayer was, with Hill & Knowlton, were the two top PR firms in that particular area. We're going back a long time, 60 years. They never took an account less than 1 year. And you paid a fee, which was handsome in those days, and all that entitled you to as a client is access to the top brass at Bayer. If you called once or 100 times, it was still that. Then if you wanted Carl Bayer to do anything, you created a staff. And that staff could be just an account executive and a secretary, for which the client paid, or in some cases, 10, 15. Honeywell had about 25. So I was a staff writer, really a staff publicist on Hallmark. At one point in time, I complained about the difficulty of getting credit for Hallmark in stories, because you had to write such and such made according to so-and-so at Hall Brothers, makers of Hallmark cards, and that was much too long for the media. So I got them to approve, or through the account executive, not me, got them to approve our use of the word Hallmark and not Hall Brothers. And of course, that's what it is today. And that was a lot of fun, because I dealt mostly at Christmas time, because that meant I dealt with Grandma Moses, Norman Rockwell, Salvador Dali, people like that, because they were the links to publicity. you had to, we didn't do hard news, it was soft news. I remember being invited up to Dolly's apartment. He thought I was an access to J.C. Hall, and he wanted to sell Hall another painting, and he was trying to use me as a lever. But I remember Grandma Moses, she was a wily old gal, handled by a real canny Austrian agent. We go up to her house, and in the living room, along the wall, there's all these pieces of plywood with green and white, grass and sky. She was a one-man production machine. She would do, and this Austrian mountebank, who was her agent, would really peddle that stuff. You know, she was great. And she was in Eagle Bridge, New York, and across the way in Vermont was Norman Rockwell. And our access to, or my access to them, was because at Christmas time, Hall, who always had an eye for quality, had the rights to their paintings for Christmas cards, and that was it. So that was my early career. After that, I worked on Honeywell, which was then called, if you can believe it, the Minneapolis Heat Regulator Company. But the product was Honeywell. So in the course of the evolution, they changed their name to Honeywell. And I guess I did publicity work, maybe half a dozen years or more, and enjoyed it. But I was totally intimidated when I got in the bar and found out who I was with. I was surrounded by former editors, anchors, magazine writers, byline authors. And I said, dear God, they're going to get me sooner or later. They call me upstairs and say, young man, we're sorry, but we made a mistake. So every Friday, and I remember this vividly, and it has a bearing on the rest of my life, every Friday I didn't get a call. I said I got another week. But what that did was, I was not a good writer, believe me, absolutely not. Bayer had at that time, and I don't think it's ever been duplicated, even today, an editor who was a former newsman, came from Indiana, and he had absolute power to reject, well, every story had to go through him. You couldn't do it today because they're too big, but he had the absolute power to reject anything for lack of news, lack of interest, poor spelling, poor writing, whatever, and there was no appeal. And the worst thing you could say to him was, well, that's the way the client wants it, and then you were dead in the water. Because I thought I was in there on a pass, I wrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote. Little stories, long stories. And he took a shine to me, I guess, because I showed so much eagerness, and so he helped me. But going beyond what is asked became a habit. And that's really what I've done ever since. I'm accused of being against the status quo, which I am, conventional wisdom, which I am. And what I liked then about the business, and I was happy as a clam doing publicity, I loved the contests with the editors, who, in those days, really had it in for PR people because they thought we got more money than they did, which is true. Not me, but the senior people. And it was sort of like selling out. And what you had to do was to give them something that was more interesting and better or as well written as they would do it, to substitute for what they had written and for which they're getting paid. So it was a daily contest, and it wasn't a boring minute, and I enjoyed it immensely. And as I look back, I probably had more fun and more enjoyment and satisfaction in those days doing just plain publicity. And I publicized over my somewhat long career. Greeting cards, Bibles, rivets, warplanes, thermostats. I mean, the most prosaic products you can think of. But I did it, and we did it successfully, and I enjoyed it. So then I got it bar. And over the time, I won. We had a internal competition on writing awards, and I made it a point to win as many as I could. And I kind of liked that because I was competing against really good people who probably didn't pay much attention to it, but I did. Finally, I became an accounts supervisor. We were very thin on titles, not today, not in this global baloney. And I had staff under me who were writers. Then it became a senior, they called it a senior counselor. And Bard changed over the years from a meritocracy to a bureaucracy, and I didn't like that. And I didn't agree with the then chief executive. And I had been dealing with a small company in Connecticut called Emhart, E-M-H-A-R-T. Basically what I was doing was just going up there maybe a couple times a year to help them with the annual report, the quarterly reports, and do an occasional analyst meeting. Emhart itself became a white knight for a huge English company called British United. And British United was the Goliath that covered the world with every kind of conceivable machinery to make shoes. But they had been accused and indicted for monopoly, and in the process of adjusting to that, they made a lot of foolish and ill-thought-out acquisitions and became virtually bankrupt in the United States, although they were profitable abroad. And they were attacked by an unwholesome raider, and they turned to Emhart, which they had known about. They're sort of their kind of people. So Emhart bought them. Now Emhart, yet a British United called then USM, was 2/3 larger than Emhart, but Emhart bought them. And in the process, I said to the then chairman of Emhart, who said I was seeing occasionally, and your life is going to change. You no longer can get by with this ad hoc PR operation. You're going to have to do more. You're going to be asked questions when you don't want to be asked. You're a big company now. You're a multinational. You have problems. Half of your shareholders are abroad who are bilingual. Your people only read the Hartford Courant. Half of your employees are abroad. So he said, well, what do I do about it? Well, I said, you can do several things. You can hire a PR person full-time, which I was now. You can promote someone from within, which you can't because you don't have anybody. Or maybe I might do it. He says, I was waiting for you to say that. So as I said, I got bored and uninterested in Carl Bard at that time, so I moved. My wife said it's a bad, bad decision. You're too impatient to get along in the corporate world. And there were a couple of occasions she was right. But, so I created whatever constituted public relations there. They didn't know what it was any more than most CEOs do today. So I wrote my own job description, and I knew the people pretty well. There were a bunch of penny pinching Yankees. So my job description, which they thought was admirable, was Mr. Budd will conduct public relations and do such other duties requested by the chairman. Now, that may not mean much to you, but what it did was give me total elbow room. I could interpret what I was doing any way I damn pleased, because that had no restriction.
Right.
And it worked. Very small staff. Created a newspaper, which I insist was not a house organ, because we never interviewed the CEO. We didn't make any pleas. If we talked to him, it was on a story. It was run by a former newsman. We had editorial cartoonists, outside photographers. It was in English, even though we had 30 languages abroad. It had high credibility. I have since told younger colleagues that it was a lever that I used to open up the company, because they understood the newspaper. They understand public relations. So I said, we've got to put it in the newspaper. And they would reluctantly agree to something they would never have done if I said, well, hey, it would be good for the public relations process. They just never understood that. Let me see what happened then next. Well, I was kicked out at 65 because senior officers had to retire at that age. Came back briefly to the PR business, this was about after 11 years. I felt like Rip Van Winkle. They hadn't improved, it just gotten bigger, but they were still doing the same damn things. So I endured that for a while. Then I decided that I didn't like it. I created my own little operation based on 3 premises. One, I thought overhead was penalizing public relations. They could charge you damn much. 2, I thought their arrogance in thinking that they had a solution to every problem was wrong. I think of a good public relations executive as a quarterback. He's not the whole damn team. And also, they were also terribly left brain oriented, no right brain. So that's what I did. And I have been doing it ever since.
And this is the Omega Group. Is that correct?
A virtual agency.
Mm-hmm.
I brought one of the pieces of stationery that I had in those days. What the hell is it? It's here someplace. These people, I knew them all, and what we had, the relationship we had was philosophical, not legal. They were all active in the specialties that you see, and the agreement was that any time that I had need for their kind of expertise, and if they were available, they would work then with me under the umbrella of Omega. And what it did is gave me, as an individual, an enormous range of capabilities.
Right, so this is this interdisciplinary team approach.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
And
can I take this? and
you,
at least
of course,
comment?
of course.
Okay, great.
Some of these people are dead now,
Right.
but
No, but this is good. This is very good.
but that was the concept,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked reasonably well. Not perfectly, reasonably well. I think if I had to do it over again, I would not have made it so voluntary. I would have tied them a little more conscientiously by giving them a modest fee or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want to get involved in that. But as I said, I know them all, knew them all, and it was really, at one point, you can have this, I summarized, I wanted to see what I was doing. I summarized the work from, we started in 1990, and this is an accounting, 2003. This is not typed very well, but that's all right, because the copy I oh, in that period, 1990, 2003, 10 of these people were engaged 21 times in projects. So to that degree, it worked. What those projects were is all in here. I don't know what you do with written material, but you may have that.
Scan it and create PDF files and
Then I also created at that time an imprint service, which is Turtle. The reason for Turtle, when I left Bayer, I was determined not to have a going away party because I was mad. But I had my own. And what I created was the Select Order of the Turtle. A turtle does not move until it sticks his neck out. Obvious, right?
right.
So I selected, in my judgment, a dozen people who I had worked with, some at Bayer, some not, as initial honorees. And we gave them a little ceramic turtle on a mahogany base. And over the years, I've honored people just, maybe they don't think it's an honor. And we get wonderful certificates, you know, on parchment, all that baloney. I remember I gave one to David Ogilvy because I've always admired him. Oh, he says, that's wonderful. I'll put it in my loo. I guess that's where he hung all those awards now. So that was fun. And I have used, then I used this as an imprint service because before my first book, I had outlined a book on credibility. I had written a sample chapter. I had a complete marketing plan because it was a niche book. All my books are niche books. And I knew exactly who to go after. And I was working with an editor, McGraw-Hill, who was younger than I. Almost everybody I worked with was younger than I. This was a long time ago. And she kept finessing me and rewriting it. And I said, she doesn't know what the hell this is all about. So I got tired. So I decided I'd do it myself. I had a good friend who was the editor of a very successful weekly up in Connecticut, but more importantly, he had two big Goss presses. I had a good friend who's in that list there who was a wonderful graphics man. So we put together a little cottage industry, and I wrote the book. And I found it was easy when I didn't have to worry about anybody looking at it and editing it but myself, and that was Street Smart Public Relations. And I promoted the hell out of it. Sent out fortune cookies, appropriately with the, and I also sent out, to quote a select list, a velvet pouch with 6 pebbles in it and a ping pong ball. And a little doggerel that said, if you throw the ping pong ball in the water, nothing much happens. Throw the pebbles and you can see the waves. And I built on that. And the proceeds from that book have subsequently underwritten some of the others. And all I ever look for in the various books that I've done, and here's some of them, is break even. Because I like to write now, and so these just keep proliferating and so forth. And I have one you may have. I don't have all that I should have because I had a huge inventory at home in Connecticut, and the house burned to the ground.
Oh.
And so did all my records and
your
all my
papers.
inventory.
Oh.
That was several years ago. If we had been at home and not in our New York apartment, I wouldn't be talking to you. Right to, when I say to the ground, I mean flat.
Wow.
Flat. It was a 10-room house on 15 acres. So, anyway, what's your next question?
Well, since you mentioned Street Smart Public Relations, let's talk about that a second.
Shoot.
Okay. In that book, you talked about the 4 R's of PR, which was
Three
reading.
R's, wasn't it?
No, reading, writing, realism, and results.
Oh, okay, I keep making them up differently. Reading, writing, and relevance, I think I would say now.
Okay. Well, what would be tell me about that. Before you had 4, reading, writing, realism, and results, and now it's reading, writing, and relevance. What has happened? Why has that changed?
No particular reason, just as I look at what's going on, I see different priorities. Reading. I don't think today that the people in the business read period or read broadly enough. Oh, they'll tell you they read the Wall Street Journal and Business Week, and that, that's not what it's all about. When I have several times I've been engaged to help a client hire an agency or something like that, and we sit down and talk, and they come in with all their hyperbole and bluster, and I just ask them, what do you read? And it's very revealing. I said, what do you really read? And it's so limited, really. How can they assume any relevance to their counsel to business, which is basically what is the bottom of it, if they don't get into the mentality and the rhythms and the worries of business people? Reading PR Week is not going to help you. Then I will also ask them, tell me when you failed. Do what? Failed. Well, and what did you do about it? Now, at Carl Bayer, that's another thing I learned there. There was no such thing as failure. Obviously, things didn't always work, but that meant that you have to work harder, what we call the second effort. I mean, I have had such things happen as a press conference when the press bus drives up and nobody gets out. Well, I'm going to tell you, your career flashes before your eyes. But 10 days later or 2 weeks later, we had more publicity in a particular event through other means. Now, in those days, we had, but I guess, I was going to say we had more media to deal with. We had things like the Western Newspaper Union, International News, United Press, but now you have the electronic versions. So I guess it breaks even. But somebody said, I can't quote them, but you have to have some failures in life to really achieve anything. I would add to that only if you look at failure as an opportunity and a beginning, not an end. So writing, I have no patience for any account executive, agency, or in the corporate world who brings in a speechwriter to write the boss's speech. And they do it for 2 reasons. They won't admit it. One, they consider it dangerous because they maybe can't write well enough. And they don't want to expose their weakness. They want to have someone else to blame. But they don't understand that assuming you can write reasonably well, you get into the CEO or whoever the boss's head in a way you could not otherwise. I mean, in the terms of a CEO, when you're doing that for him or her, you become closer to their wife or husband because you are helping them in a moment which they are most uncomfortable at. And if it works, and if you've done a good job, boy, I had, early in my career, I got into meetings that I had no right to be in only because he wanted me there because he knew I had the right he wanted me to know about. So how they can give up such a golden opportunity to really establish their relationships with their boss, I don't know. Of course, they will tell you, and I'm sure you'll hear it, how close they are to the CEO, because we have instant access. That's a lot of baloney. There's a difference. I don't deny that they see the CEO more regularly than we did in the early days, or certainly I did when I was a staffer. But the difference between being called in to report, being called in to get an assignment, versus coming in chat to ask advice before something's done, not what you're going to do afterwards. So access has to be really examined, I think. So the reading, the writing, and if you don't do anything that relates to what the company is counting on you to do, if it's not relevant, why the hell are you doing it? One of the chairman I worked for says, I'm not always sure what he's doing, but I know he has a reason. I'm serious.
Yeah.
So that's how Street Smarts worked out.
Okay. You mentioned something. Let's talk a minute about this. Let's talk about your personal philosophy and what you believe are necessary characteristics and qualities for PR professionals. Now, let's start with descriptors that I have found either before your name or following your name or from individuals who are writing about you or whatever. And some of them you've mentioned, and there are some other ones. Curmudgeon.
Oh, yeah.
Elder
Do you realize that
statesman.
Bill Buckley was a curmudgeon? There's a book out, World Class Curmudgeons. Little small book. And among those listed is Buckley, George Will, and so on. So I consider, as a matter of fact, one of the books I'm going to write one of these days, I got halfway done, Curmudgeonly Speaking, it's going to be called. I'm going to try to change the definition of curmudgeon. Which you can't change definition very easily. And the definition in all the dictionaries is along the lines of what you talk about, irritating, contrarian, and so forth, doesn't like anybody. Curmudgeons can't stand hypocrisy. Curmudgeons want to know why. They're not satisfied with conventional wisdom. I think that for curmudgeon in the context of all the positive things, not the negative. So, yeah, I've been called curmudgeon, contrarian, iconoclast.
You also read an article, I think you spent a lot of time talking about the word why.
Ah,
And he has something. The power of why, yes, okay. Yeah.
why am I doing this? Why am I doing it today? Why can't I do it better? It's a very personal thing. If you adopt the philosophy of that and apply it to yourself silently, you'll do a lot better. Years and years ago, IBM had a slogan called Think. I don't know if you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the psychology of that always fascinated me because it created, or they hoped it created, and I think it did, the perception that their people were more intellectual than the competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a magazine, and they had Think all over the damn place. Mm-hmm. I have tried unsuccessfully to get a couple of clients to adopt why in the same context. And then just think about it. If you had just why, spread throughout an agency, the immersion in that three-letter word could be extraordinary.
Absolutely. All right, so let's,
Why am I here?
wow.
Because
Why-
I may die soon. Hope not.
So, you mentioned that you were an enemy of the status quo and a pronounced foe of conventional wisdom, and you've also been described as PR's devil's advocate. So,
Well, look, I know sooner or later we're going to get to communications, but public relations, in my estimation, is a very flexible discipline because it addresses, and should address at least, a lot of intangible factors which are subjective. So you can't set down formulas. There's nothing pro forma about a good all-around public relations practice. And first of all, it's not a profession. As you know, it can never be a profession until there's standards of entry and discipline for violations, of which we have none. Anybody can call themselves. So and there's too much self-worth among the practitioners. They are not a profession. But you can have principles and standards of performance, but not formulas, I don't think. And that's one of the things that always attracted me to it, because every client and every situation was different, just like the fingerprints of people are different. And you build up a storehouse of experiences, but then you tailor them to what are going on. You don't just change the name in a release, put the client in, but they do. You know, that the young people who are now older are getting a pass in terms of intellectual involvement, I think.
well, what
I
can you
mean,
do about that?
promoting a nudist colony is not exactly what I call public relations. If you read PR Week, which I look at only to keep a finger around, it is all job changes, client acquisitions. There's a philosophy, apparently, that lateral movement enhances a career. I don't agree to that. If the lateral movement involves different responsibilities, there's something to be said for that. But it doesn't usually. And the weakness of it is that lack of stability. I mean, you can get bored in this business, believe me. You have to fight that. I have been bored many times. Part of the reason I've written so many books and articles is out of boredom. You know,
Yeah.
you can't be on all cylinders all the time. So,
Okay. We mentioned earlier, it might have been before we started rolling the camera, the relevance of liberal studies, the arts, social and behavioral sciences,
oh, well, I
and so
mean,
forth.
as an
So-
academic, you'd understand that.
Right.
What liberal arts brings to you is curiosity, examples from history. It really makes your right brain work. The left brain, part of the problem of chief executives have these days is their entire career, if you think about it, has been measured quantitatively. in college, marks. In business school, marks. Then they start a professional career in business, and return on investment, profit margin, whatever it might be, it's all marks. Then they become a CEO. And then they find out, much to their horror or dismay, that they are also their performance is also being measured by non-measurable financial factors: integrity, trust, credibility. What is this stuff? They're very uncomfortable with it because everything they've done in the past has been concrete in one way or another. And now they're being, I mean, there have been CEOs who have been discharged for reasons that have nothing to do with their ability to do the business side. I can mention several. Carla Fioroni at Hewlett-Packard, an arrogant female. One of the first things she did in this sort of family-oriented company is take down the portrait of the founder, David Packard, and put her own up. She got fired. They don't say it that way, but she did. She made speeches about herself. Some of the policies that she started are being executed. So from a business point of view, she was on the mark. From a cultural, traditional point of view, the board should never have brought in a person like that who was so an antithesis of the culture of Hewlett-Packard. And then you have a guy like Bob Nardelli of Home Depot, who grew up under Jack Welch, which is supposed to be an anointing as a sainthood. What people don't remember, that Jack Welch served the General Electric for 20 years, which is extraordinary. But in 20 years, you can change your reputation. And of at least half of that, he was known as Jack the Knife, very negative. So Nardelli shows his disdain for the shareholders by telling the board, you don't have to come to the annual meeting. And then the few that did show up, when they ask a question, he say, no, next question, yes, next question, whatever. He got fired. He should never have been in a public company. He wasn't a nice person. Now, some of the policies that he instituted are going on. Then you have a guy like Stanley O'Neill of Merrill Lynch. Now, I don't say I'm a wizard in sociology or psychology, but when you have a CEO who belongs to 4 country clubs, avid golfer who prefers to play alone, it's like that book, Bowling Alone, you have to say to yourself, wait a minute, there's something missing here. It was a manifestation of his disdain. He picked subordinates who were subordinate. He didn't pick talent. He didn't pick people who could challenge him. Now he's out. But there was clues. Damon of Bear Stearns, who was an avid bridge player, who denied that he put bridge before the company. Where was he when they had a major crisis? He was off at a bridge tournament. I mean, these little clues, because these people don't understand the power of perceptions.
Yes, you have said that perceptions, not facts, set the public agenda.
Sure. What you believe to be true is what you think is true, and it is true to you. I mean, you get into the subject of broader reading. I'm a fan of Dan Yankelovich because I think he's a very, very savvy sociologist. And he's written a number of books and made a number of speeches, and all of which are totally relevant to us in the so-called PR business. He had a book on dialogue.
Yes.
And, you know, to oversimplify what he said, dialogue is an exchange between people, as we're doing. A a lot of the communication that we're making comes from the body language, facial expressions, whatever. You know, but I'll bet you I could name about 10 books and you could poll the senior people in public relations, they haven't read them. Haven't read them. That's what I mean by not reading. There's a lot of junk out there because the professors who've never met a payroll have all the answers, you know. Or the CEO who writes books about how to run a company, which he didn't do it himself. Or he has a ghostwriter for him. But there are books out there that are very interesting. For example, there's a not too deep a book by a guy by the name of Gary Hamel, who makes a small fortune consulting and writing, but it's called The Future of the Corporation. No, The Future of Management. And what he says, and what I liked about it, he doesn't give you a solution, he only raises the problem. Now, most writers, academics and consultants always have a magic answer, but he makes a very persuasive case that management model that we are now operating under is totally incapable of addressing the complexities of a global business environment. And he gives case after case of why that's true. And if you read it, you have to be brain dead not to challenge what you're doing yourself. And I've recommended to several CEOs, but they don't read much either. The trick to getting a CEO to read something is to get his secretary to put it in his bag when he goes on a trip. I've often said I've been married 13 times because I worked with or for directly 13 CEOs. And the people I worked on most were their secretaries because they can make or break you.
Now, what do you think of the value of, for these individuals that you just mentioned? Corporations may have a value statement, a mission statement, a code of ethics. I mean, how valuable is that if management and the CEOs...
Not very, because it's attitude over aptitude, anytime. And part of the public relations problem is that they offer solutions that are superficial. I particularly concerned about selling reputation as they do. You don't sell, you don't manufacture reputation, you earn it. Now, there's nothing wrong with a company hiring a public relations firm to improve their reputation if the firm starts out by finding out what's wrong with it and getting management to agree to change their conduct. That's why I say attitude over aptitude. When they get public approval by media attention for ethical guidelines or any of that stuff, without actually committing themselves, I mean the CEOs, without actually committing themselves to that, they think that the job is done. And you know, it's these are the things that you have to think about. Any one of those items can make or break a reputation. And you can't, I don't care how clever a writer you are, or how media savvy you are, you can't do it unless the product's there, and the product's are the people.
Right.
When you're going to ask me at some point what I'm most proud of.
Yes.
When I left Emhart, the then chairman asked me to come to a board meeting, and he said, you know, John's leaving and so forth, and if any of you have anything to say to him, do it now. And they went around our usual stuff, except the previous CEO and chairman, who was stepping down, although staying on the board, And he said, well, what I always remember was John taught me the importance of credibility. That was my weapon against the lawyers often. You can't use it too often. And the other thing I think of with some pride is the creation of a credibility index, which when Ray Galkey was president of PRSA, it was my idea. We got a grant from the PRSA Foundation and a grant from Rockefeller. I think the sum total was about 200,000 to research and create a credibility index. And one of the people on that list, Ron Hinckley, who was a superb opinion analyst, was really the person who made the idea come to fruition. We had an academic, we had 4 universities involved, several academic experts in the area. It was done so well that it was accepted by the opinion peers. And what it proved in essence was that people give their trust to executives depending on the issue. In some cases, they may believe the foreman in the plant more than they believe the CEO, or the mayor more than the congressman, and so on and so forth. So the idea of any universal way of building trust is not really logical. You have to tailor it to the issue and so forth. And too often in the PR field, when things really get tough, they turn to the CEO and think he's going to solve everything. Get him on the stump. Get him going. He may be the worst person in the world to do it. There may be others who have more credibility with the shareholders or with the employees or whatever it is. I was very disappointed that they never pursued it further, let it die. They did the one thing and that's it. Oh, they did a modest follow-up on investor relations, but other than that, it's never been done. And there is one agency who has a thing they call Reputation Barometer, which is a total steal, but they don't offer any answers. They only raise questions, and that's no damn good.
Right.
I don't think. So let them stew.
And then just see if there's anything else you want
No, keep going, you know.
Okay.
Well, maybe we should talk about, this is my new book coming out in the fall.
to. Okay.
Communication is a process, and it diminishes public relations. I mean, you be very successful in counseling without actually doing communications as it's defined now. You know, you're just talking to somebody and saying, don't do that. How do you measure advice given and taken to eliminate a problem that does not arise? Whereas if you hadn't given me advice, there would be all sorts of difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
That's public relations and may not involve communication. Don't do it. Do not fire people before Thanksgiving or Christmas. And when you go and get a $15 million bonus or whatever. Harold Burson believes it too. He said, the adoption of communications as a synonym for public relations started the business on a slippery slope. And I agree totally. If you go through the page directory, you will find few titles that use the word public relations. These people who are the so-called elite of the field these days go to watering holes of Baker Raton or Vail and listen to gurus talk about things that they have no involvement in. It's like fantasy baseball. It really is. It is their way of reinforcing their sense of self-worth. But then they go back to their day job and are pushing vitamins or something like that. They're not counseling. And the so-called PR seminar dropped the word PR because it was irrelevant. PR Week is not really, it should be Communications Week, but there is a publication like that. But I think it has two disadvantages, one subtle and one very profound. It encourages senior corporate officers to think of the process as implementation, the public relations process. They don't make any distinction in their mind between public relations and communications. To them, it's all the same thing. It's media work, whatever it is. They never think of it, or rarely, think of it in terms of advice and counsel. The PR people, or the communicators, as they call themselves, are called in after the fact, not before the fact. Everybody communicates. There's no question about that. That broad application of the term to public relations, it just diminishes what public relations is. And as far as the practitioners are concerned, they love the cachet of public relations, but they call themselves communicators. Just look at their titles. It's where they get their kicks, I guess. I don't know. But it's what's going to happen, and that's what I wrote. This book covers the past, present, and what I foresee as the future of public relations. The world is so complex, and we've just read about it every day, that CEOs are going to need somebody at their side who can see the world through a different prism than the accustomed disciplines in a business. I mean, the legal, the accounting, the operational, the marketing people think in the terms of their own discipline, and they can be very excellent at it, but they do not go beyond it. Somebody has to be sitting there and saying, if you do it that way, Chief, you're going to create more problems than you're solving. Why? Well, because. So that's one thing. If the President of the United States has, and has, I guess always have had, personal advisor to the President for Foreign Affairs, or whatever the title is. They're going to be in need and will be fulfilled by, not by PR people, tell me. Personal advisor to the President on public policy, or personal advisor to the Chief Executive on personal policy. It's going to come from liberal arts graduates. Maybe they can't sit down and write a white paper. Maybe they can't write a big speech. They're going to hire the communicators to do that. But they're going to sit there and ideally they should have no administrative duties because that gets in the way. They should just be thinkers. Leonardo da Vinci was supported himself and was successful not as an inventor or a painter. He was a counselor. Princes paid him handsomely just to sit and talk to him. There's a book out, it's not out, been out for a long time, called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. And I read it, and it led me to write a book about how to change your job into a career. The author of the How to Think About Like Da Vinci identified 12 attributes of Da Vinci personality, 3 of which applied particularly to public relations. And one was curiosity, which is, you can define it many ways, you know, anti-status quo, whatever, but why? The second was the use of the right brain. And the third was the ability to see an obscure event or read about an obscure event and start to think of it in terms of another obscure event, and all of a sudden a pattern emerges. And people don't like that because you're seeing problems they don't see, or they ignore them, or worse, they deny they're ignoring them. There was a professor at the University of California years and years ago who wrote a paper on this, which I've treasured, and he likened the development of a public opinion to a biological process, awareness, and so on. So I really do believe that, and it's not going to be the current generation of CEOs, because they're still wedded. And it's not going to be the ones that immediately follow them, because they're coming out of the B school who are still teaching models and case histories and formulas. And I don't care if they say that we not put social responsibility in there and all that sort of thing. They are not touching the really roots of what I'm talking about. Down the road, and I'll probably not be here to see it, there's going to be a class of young people coming out of the business schools who are not wedded to that quantitative mentality. And they are going to be liberal arts people. They are not going to be journalists. They're not going to be technological people who are wizards with email and Facebook and all that stuff. They're going to be entrepreneurial, mentally. They're going to be intellectual. And they're going to see problems where others don't see it. And they're going to have really good advice. And they're going to be free to do that. I would, if I were starting a company or someone would ask me, I would put a sociologist somewhere at the top. And certainly if I had a decent public relations operation, which would be called that, it would have a sociologist. A good friend of mine is a tenured sociologist at Williams College. He's a little different from most in that he has tramped plant floors more than you can realize. He wrote two books. One was Image Makers, and the other was called Moral Mazes, M-A-Z-E-S. And he studied why employees hear different messages than the brass is sending them. This, if you think about it, it's a very profound thought. Mm-hmm. You're going to need people like that. I mean, he and I collaborate. At least we have lunch and blow our brains out equally. And that stuff fascinates me. How do you do that? And now look what we're going through with Mark Penn. You've read about it. The tragedy is that the corporate clients of Burson Marsteller will not see the relevance of the hypocrisy that it represents. It's not that he double-talked and embarrassed Hillary Clinton. He doesn't know. He has no moral background. He doesn't realize the conflict of interest. He doesn't realize what it will do to the reputation of integrity and honesty and truth for Burson Marsteller. And nor does, I've read in the paper before I came here this morning, Martin Sorrell sees nothing wrong with it. I mean, he's not going to change his policy. She says the world is too complex. We have these things happen. He made a mistake. That's true. But he's going to continue to build Burson Marsteller. Martin Sorrell was looking at it as money. He's not looking at it as the reputation of Burson Marsteller. I mean, here's a guy. First of all, he's very unpleasant if you read the papers. He's disdainful of any point of view but his own. He's arrogant, he's smug. What else? The people at the Hillary campaign hate him. The media hates him. And I can't believe the people at Burson Marsteller love him, but I don't know. But he was permitted to maintain his own polling company in addition to being CEO of Burson Marsteller. It would be interesting to see how much business he funneled from Burson Marsteller. Where did the $13 million he got from Hillary go? Did any of it go to Burson Marsteller, or was it all to him? How much is he making in the polling company, and where does that go? And how much is he making at Burson Marsteller? And Martin Sorrell, who is a very bright guy and has certainly made his critics into fan what he's done with WPP, you know, that company, he's a holding company. But he reveals his misunderstanding of what public relations is all about when he is dismissive of the enormity of what is represented in not only Penn's actions, but Penn's attitude. And how can the PR business survive if it doesn't stand up for principle? You talk about the Page principles. You have Fleischman Hillard a couple of years ago, where their highly touted head of their Los Angeles office, who had been a local figure of some political importance, was accused, indicted, and is now in prison for kiting the bills to one of the city's agencies. And in the process of the accusations and the trials and all that sort of thing, you heard nothing from Fleischman Hillard. They distanced themselves from it. Why didn't they stand up? Why didn't John Graham say, God damn it, that's terrible? If I had not, they didn't say. If they had treated a client's crisis communications the way they handled their own, they would have deserved to have been fired. What about Ketchum, another big, once proud company, accused of money laundering? That's what they did. You don't hear it. Why are they silent? You talk about it being a profession. It's not a profession when they can't even stand up and talk about it. You won't hear peep from any PR people about Mark Penn. That is what annoys me and irritates me. Now, the last 8 or 9 or 10 years, I've been well removed from the functional activities of public relations. I'm working much more with the corporate side. I'm on the advisory board of the National Association of Corporate Directors. I'm a director of the New York chapter of corporate directors. I'm looked upon as sort of the director of special programs, meaning that I conceive of a luncheon program that isn't the usual boilerplate that all the governance people do these days. A man by the name of John Bogle, who made a very solid reputation in the mutual fund business, wrote a book about the battle for the soul of capitalism. Very thoughtful man. He's older, of course, so he speaks up. And we had a session on that. To me, that's fascinating. Maybe to others it's pretty boring, but
I doubt that.
who knows? But that's why I write this newsletter. That's another thing I started.
Yes, yes. Okay.
It's bi-monthly
And
And-
it's an invitation only?
only, because I got a very eclectic mailing list. A lot of there's lawyers and CEOs and consultants and I will say senior PR people. And what I try to do in it is interpret in the context of public opinion what's going on and what you should do about it. In other words, the way that even if you're thought of as a communicator in a company or in an agency representing a company, one of the ways you can earn your way into a counseling mode is by taking the initiative and sending memos or whatever to the CEO and say, look, this is just such and such is happening, and this is what might happen, and this is what we ought to think about. And this is what I try to point out here, and hoping to give clues what you might do. But public relations is a very individualistic business. There are those who where ambition is more than just a word in a dictionary. They really believe it. They will move and they will do it, and they will succeed. And there are successful people in the business. They're much in the minority. So be it. This is another talk I gave way back when.
Okay, but yes, yes.
This is typical of some of the white papers I do.
Okay, great. Yeah, you are a prolific writer. Wow.
And this was something I conceived of, but it was unsuccessful. I thought that, and I know why it wasn't successful, CEOs would welcome the advice of a retired CEO who they could talk with impunity, whereas they might be hesitant letting their hair down with anyone on the board.
Yeah, so.
What I didn't, and we had a few assignments, and I signed up again philosophically, like I said before, a half dozen, maybe 8 retired senior executives who thought it was a good try. What I didn't really count on is how immune sitting CEOs are to advice. My thesis was correct, I know that. And you can see it now by the short tenure the CEOs have. But this was a little too avant-garde for them.
This being the CEC, which is the Chief Executives Council of the Omega Group.
Right.
Right.
So, but it was a good idea, didn't fly.
Well, do you think that the new media, the electronic age, this new technology, including the internet, is making the public relations industry, the public relations practice, more or less ethical?
Well, first of all, there is no public relations process. What does it do in the communications or communicators? No, I don't think it's making it more. Walter Wriston, who was a highly regarded head of Citi Corp, now deceased, once told me, he said, your ethics come from your family. You don't hire them and find them later. So if you're going to operate unethically, you're going to do it. And if you operate ethically, no matter what the venue is, you're going to be. That's why I'm not particularly enamored of ethical guidelines. It doesn't, it's a lot of showmanship. And the same thing applies to corporate social responsibility. I think companies have an innate responsibility to their community,
Right.
employees and so on and so forth. And because they do have the leverage of their size and money, they should do more than just make successful products. But they should really extend their social responsibilities in areas they're responsible for, or in disciplines that relate to them and not others. You know, if all the CEOs ever did it, what all the social activists asked them to do, there'd be no social activists. They live off the green mail from companies. They're not satisfied. It's amazing to me how many companies pay for their own troubles. They underwrite seminars and lectures and other things for people who are dedicated anti-capitalists. And it doesn't take rocket science to find out who these people are and what they stand for, and do you agree or don't you agree? And if you don't agree, and if they're truly negativists and so forth, you have no right to support them. I would wonder what would happen if you asked individual shareholders, not the institutions, the individual shareholders, would you give 50 cents a share or $1 a share to underwrite such and such a program? I bet you'd get a big no. You put your money or you buy company stock for only one reason. You want to get, you think and you hope that the investment will appreciate,
Right.
and you'll get dividends. That is why you're doing it. Otherwise, you have no reason. You're not going to do it because that company is green. It doesn't mean anything to you if your investment withers. Now, if you're satisfied with the financial results and the company is actively engaged in worthwhile activities, that's fine, and you can be proud of having money in that company. But it's not why you do it initially. And I think boards, particularly boards and CEOs, are trying to buy peace. And I can understand why they want to, but somebody's got to take a stand someplace on some of these things. I'm writing a piece for the next newsletter because I've been reading stories about carbon emissions and so on. You tell me who's going to buy stock in a company because the carbon emissions are point something what. I mean, I don't understand it. Who does? Even the people doing it don't understand it, I don't think.
Is there anything that you'd like to say that we haven't gone over
Whatever.
to the
Upcoming public relations practitioners, this next generation, what else might you want to say to them so that they could be better at what they do?
Spirit of dissatisfaction.
Okay.
You know, don't be immobilized by temporary success, small perks, fancy titles. There's always a way to do it better, and it depends on what you personally want. And if ambition is an adjective and not a noun, you're going to have to earn it. By and large, public relations business is in the corporate world. So you better immerse yourself in that. Just don't go to PR meetings, go to business meetings. Get into their mindset, into their rhythms. Talk to them. Read what they read, not what you read. If you go to one of the, like the Page meeting, I'm not going to it because I don't think those speakers they chosen have anything to say that I need to know. But nevertheless, I have never gone to a business meeting where I haven't gotten something out of it. Maybe a contact, maybe an idea. And I have gone to an awful lot. Well, I wonder why I'm going. But you have to be dissatisfied with what you're doing and your own progress. One of my friends that I've developed over the years is a man by the name of Donald Kehoe. Now, Donald Kehoe was the president and soul of Coca-Cola. He was the guy who went to the 200 and some odd countries where Coke is sold and spread the gospel. He retired at 65, and Coke went through a series of bad choices for CEOs. So in a totally unprecedented move, they re-elected him to the board at 77. He's a graduate of Notre Dame. He's a garrulous storyteller Irishman, but as solid as a steel bar. And my daughter got involved in her husband's security business, and he has MS, so she was running it for a while. And I asked Don if he'd talk to her, and he graciously did. And what he said she still walks on water from that meeting. He said, set down your own goals, what you really think you want to do, and look at them at least every couple of months and see how you're doing. And if you cheat, you're only cheating yourself. And I kind of do that unconsciously, you know. You need that kind of discipline, and I think personal discipline is an important thing for young people. I can't tell them to be ethical or be moral because they either are or they aren't. I could give them all kinds of guidelines. That doesn't mean anything, you know. One of the cliches of the business, you put your job on the line every day. Well, I'd like to know who left because they disagreed with something. They don't put their job on the line every day. That's an old wives' tale. Now, as to, and you mentioned it in your questions, I did a research and wrote a profile of Arthur Page one time. So I think I know, although I certainly never met him, I think I got a feeling of what he was all about. And while I think the Arthur Page principles are noble, but they're a little too pious. Arthur Page was not pious. First of all, Arthur Page was not a public relations person. He was a business executive. He dealt with his peers who were also directors. He had great instinct, obviously, about the relationship of a company to its employees and to its neighbors and so on and so forth. And he articulated those, but not in those wonderfully codified terms that are in the Page directory. Right. I don't think he disagreed with any of them, and I think they're great to have. But then there's a little lacking of reality in some of them, I think, I fear. I don't, an organization has to have something like that, but they also should realize the practical side, I think. But get over the fear of writing. I don't care what you do.
Right.
If you don't do that well, and if you don't like to do it, you know, it's too bad. It's so much more important than being a virtuoso with technology. You can always hire those people. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know what the curriculum is at Penn State, but if you ever want a role model to look at Ball State. Do you know much about it?
No, I really don't.
They have an extraordinary communications operation. They have their own radio station. They have their own newspaper. They have their own PR firm who actually take local assignments. It's a beautiful university buried out in Muncie, Indiana. I'm very impressed by what they do in terms of what we're talking about. And I've been to other schools who are okay, but they stand out.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, they're also buried under journalism.
right. Yeah. Penn State has what you talked about. They've got PR
Well,
firms.
it's only about a couple of years now, though, isn't it?
Well, the School of Communications was organized, I think, in '85. Then it became the college in, what, '91 or '2 or something?
Yeah.
And
What's the background of the dean?
journalism.
Mm.
Journalism. He comes from
Practical journalism or academic?
practical, but he was a sports writer, wasn't he? I think he was a sports writer. He's,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
His name is what, Anderson?
Right, Doug
Yeah.
Anderson. Right, he came out of Arizona State.
Out of where?
Arizona State was
Uh-huh.
where he was before he came out to
Uh-huh.
Penn State.
What was he doing in Arizona State?
He was the Walter Cronkite,
Oh,
he was the
okay.
head of the department, or
Okay.
the journalism.
Mhm.
Yes, the program is really growing. It's,
You know, one thing I've often thought about, dealing with the present and not the idealistic future. What could help, I think? A boot camp for graduates of a program such as yours, Ball States and whatever. It could be 3 days, it could be 1 day. To inculcate these young people into what the real world of public relations is about. Because they graduate full of academic theories on behavioral modification, cognitive dissonance, all that sort of stuff, which is fine. I never had any of that, and I wish I did. And then they go for a job at an agency or a company and find that what they're asked to do uses none of that. And they get disillusioned. And I've heard some numbers about how many really don't stay in the field or even get into it after they graduate. So if you had a boot camp, and I've envisioned this in my mind often, I would have a faculty of nobody but retired. I don't want anybody who's working because they're going to tell me how good it is. Somebody to say what it's like in a corporation who's been there and retired. And not everybody who's retired is capable of being objective. Agency,
right.
business in a sense. What is the corporate mentality? You know, where do you go? A real hard-nosed preparation for what they're going to face. And it should be a sponsored. Transportation is probably the biggest cost by the Institute of PR or Page, but I can't get anybody interested because they think we got it licked. They don't care. But God, I think that would be enormously helpful, because what they're going to do if they decide or think they decided they want a career in public relations, the first few years they're going to be apprentices. I don't care what kind of title. Now they have things like junior assistant accounting executive. What kind of crap is that? Dear God. But they won't really understand what it's all about for several years. But they should realize that that is an apprentice, not an internship, an apprenticeship they're going through. And all of the things that they learn, it's like liberal arts. You don't immediately use it. You don't know when it's going to kick in your career. And all of a sudden, you remember something Shakespeare said that relates to a point you want to make. Or if you can't remember, you know how to look it up. But it comes in later. And if they got that kind of a briefing, which I think should only be available to those who are interested enough and maybe even pay their own way to wherever it may be, like in New York or someplace. I think it would be a hell of a help.
Good idea.
Because they
Think
got to
about it.
take that theoretical stuff and not dismiss it as being theoretical. Tuck it away. But meanwhile, do what's asked. And, the earlier part you learned. What I learned when I was doing publicity was, A, how to research, how to judge the bias and prejudice of editors, how to make judgments on what was newsworthy, and how to write, and how to recover when it flops. I mean, seriously, and you're not going to do that right at the beginning. You're not going to sit down and tell the boss, the CEO, how to do his strategic planning. And I would recommend people go into an agency first, not a company, because if you get in the company hierarchy, you're going to have a long haul up. In an agency, a good agency, you're more likely to be exposed to more opportunities, so you grow that way. And then when you go, and then you can move into a company, and that's of course the way I did. But I came in much later. If I had done it earlier, it might have been different. But I was an acknowledged expert when I came in, so I got away with a lot. What did they know? But it was, as I look back, it was interesting, still interesting. Now my biggest problem was to try to educate directors into what being a director really means. The fiction is that shareholders elect these people to be their representative, and that the directors hire the CEO. Will you tell me why, if you pick the CEO, because he has the qualities of leadership, whatever, right? And then you hire an executive coach? What's going on? I mean, if he was that good, he didn't need an executive coach. And that's a big business now. Another colleague of mine, and these are the things you accumulate over the years, was the dean of psychology at Tulsa University, and his specialty was personality. And he's now in private practice in Oklahoma. He's written a book on personality. But he makes the point that the reason so many boards are surprised when the CEO implodes because they haven't done their due diligence when they hired him, because executive search firms are overwhelmed by charisma and don't dig deep enough. And if you dug deeper into a candidate, you would find out whether he's a narcissist or whatever his hang-ups are. And he's developed a battery of tests, personality assessment, he calls them. It's not perfect, obviously, but it's a hell of a lot better than they're doing. And if they did more thinking along those lines, there would be less surprises as the ones we read about.
Well, I'll tell you, I want to thank you.
Uh,
This has been wonderful.
I-
I really